Well, welcome, Tom Barnett. Thank you very much for another interview.
Thanks, Kathleen. Nice to see you.
Great to see you too. So I'm Kathleen Dudley. I'm a holistic practitioner, as is Tom Barnett, Tom in Australia and myself in the US and New Mexico. And today we're going to take on another conversation on the issue of the planned destruction of our men. This one is going to be about moral injury and our birthrights. And I thought it was an important issue to talk about because we are told so many things about who we are and what our rights are. And at the same time, here we are confronted with our freedoms being taken away, our capacity to engage with our family and friends and communities and to be able to go about living our lives, singing and gathering and just being free human beings. And so along with that, we've been, what, a year and a half under this draconian stuff? Is that really true, Tom?
Yeah, feels like longer, actually.
Well, it does to me too. And so I wanted to talk about just the moral injury that that befalls upon us, and befalls upon our men, who, you know, some people say, oh well, it's not a gender issue, but I really do see it as the gender issue being a very significant issue, because we have evolved as men and women, and men as the protector, men as the provider, men as the hunter, and women birthing the children and caring for the hearth and doing the gathering and working cooperatively to make that entire union successful. In fact, to the point that we are here today because of that very union of male and female. And there were very delineated postures for both a man and a woman at those times. I mean, if a woman decided she didn't want to marry or create a union, she wouldn't procreate. So her own DNA, her own genetics wouldn't be brought forward. So we are of people who have chosen relationship, chosen to procreate. We're here today for that reason. And with those very delineated roles, we have had a very strong evolutionary process occur to bring us that many thousands and hundreds of thousands of years forward. So here we have a time when we actually are seeing an attack against our men, their careers, their capacity to be fully whom they are. So along with that comes this concept of moral injury. Would you talk to that, please, Tom?
Sure. Well, I think that this began a while back. So before the idea of rolling out Event 201 and the current agenda, the masculinity itself has been under attack for quite some time. Because in order to roll something like this out, you need the defenses already somewhat dismantled. As you say, men have traditionally been the providers and protectors. And without that strong masculine presence at the front line, it's very easy. Well, it's a lot easier to roll out this kind of agenda. And I think it was necessary for them to do. So we've seen the confusion and the stripping away, or essentially the persecution of masculinity, to create, you know, kind of genderless or fluid gender or very homogenous types of men in society, where those traditional roles are either frowned upon or looked down upon, or, you know, said that it's wrong in some way or what have you. So it confuses men, and men have been taken out of, as you said, who they are. Not every man, of course, but enough to be able to roll through this kind of this nefarious agenda, which is just now, the little leeches are being put in everywhere. Whereas if the men were already ready for that at the start, it would have been a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
So the morality, the injury there is in essentially taking away the essence of what a man is for himself. And in doing so, that's like the front line to morality. I think really, it is not only my personal thoughts on it, but the feminine is there to provide almost like a framework of, goodness and just that, that element of being the kindness, those virtues of being nurturing and holding a place, making a place beautiful, making it somewhat safe. But the men are there to protect what is created. So by the men being taken away from that role, then the morality is no longer there, because the men stand for the honor. The men stand for, this is what's right and wrong, and this is what will be protected with our lives if necessary. And when that's taken away, then morality almost goes with it. So then that to me is where this injury has occurred for, in a moral sense.
Very, very interesting and well spoken. So how does that get taken away? How does that affront happen?
Slowly, slowly and multi-layered, because you try to do that in one go, it doesn't work at all. It's just everyone would be, what are you doing? That's just doesn't make any sense. We're not having any of that nonsense. But if you chip away at it slowly and then kind of take away, you got to hit both sides as well, besides meaning masculine and feminine. You've got to also kind of try to turn the feminine on the masculine, so that the masculine needs to get to be confused. And then you have to directly attack the masculine as well. And it happens very slowly over time. So it starts from creating different role models, for example. So rather than the masculine men being the role models, they become a bit more homogenized, a bit more effeminized. And then slowly, like, you can't just go from a rugged masculine man as a role model to like a skinny teenage boy with no facial hair and not that facial hair makes a man, but I'm just saying stereotypically that rugged looking guy compared to a very much more effeminate looking guy. If you go straight from one to the other, nobody's buying it. But if you just chip away at that slowly and also make digs at it along the way, and then over decades you get to this, then that appears normal now. And what used to be considered masculine is now just old news. That's the way things were, old archetype, or looked down upon now. That's toxic. That's not evolved, as if we've evolved in some way, all this narrative, this suggestion, the power of suggestion over time can absolutely change minds that are able to be changed. There are minds that are not able to be changed, and we still see many people in the world like that. So it's not that all is lost, but there has been a big shift in what we consider to be masculine and feminine, and that's where the confusion is. But to answer the question, one simple phrase, it's just that it's over time, chipping away, and it's that slow destruction, not an instantaneous one.
Yes, and so what the question that begs to be asked at this moment is why? Why, Tom? Why this effort to create moral injury? Why this effort to turn the two genders upon one another? What is this? I mean, is it something within our own psyches, or is it external? How do you answer that?
Well, it's divide and conquer, for one. That's the oldest trick in the book, and that needs to be done in order to take something. I'm going to ask you actually after I give my answer, because I know that you've put something forward, which is along the lines of there's an element of needing to, if somebody's being hard done by, essentially, there's an element there. I know you've spoken about it. If it's not enough for you to trigger your memory, I'll expand upon it. But with when we're confused about what to do, then inaction occurs, and not just inaction, but we are inert. So as opposed to having this natural flow of energy within us, that we know morality, we know right from wrong, and we know what to do about it, because we have our roles. When they're taken away, that's when confusion ensues. And when something, even our innate inbuilt mechanism that recognizes morality and will stand for it and not let something happen, for example, when that's confused, even that innate, or what else would you call it? It's like an instinct. Even that instinct is confused and will not act. And it's preyed upon. It's preyed upon because when it's confused, they know that they can put in something that will go against morality or moral code, but that will instill further confusion. So it's almost like this tease that has been put in place. And I know you've spoken about it before in certain ways. Do you know what I'm talking about, or is it?
Give me a few more hints.
It was either in an email that we've spoken about with each other, or it was in one of the last conversations. But it's about just this: when people know what is right and wrong, essentially, it's like a care. I think the word is care.
The burning of care.
Yeah, that.
Yes. Well, and that goes back quite a while. That goes back to the Bohemian Grove in Northern California. And they had eulogies where they quite literally had these fires where they burned care. And it was so that there was no, it's the psychopath who does not, is not capable of care, is not capable of compassion, capable of emoting and recognizing the emotion within anyone, let alone connecting within themselves. So this whole idea of burning care, they consciously eulogized, which is a very dark issue to me, because if we don't care, we can't love, and if we can't love and we can't care, then we're not able to fully be human. And the psychopaths are attempting to take that away from us. They are stripping us of these of our capacity to touch one another, of the general concept of intimacy and the action of intimacy, so that we begin to live within their own hell, right? A place where they don't know how to love. They truly want, I sense, like the rotten apple spoils the bushel of apples. You get a small percentage of psychopaths making the rules and affecting us, and it can impact us. It does impact us, right? I mean, it's harder to look at someone in the eye when people are wearing masks. It's more difficult to connect. All of those things are moral injuries to us, not just to our men, but to our children and to the girls and the women. And so yes, it's a very serious affront that we're facing.
Yeah. Well, and one of the ways that we pick up care is in the eyes, but it's very much in the facial expression, which is removed when people are masked, for example. Like girls learn from a young age to read facial expressions much better than guys do. Yeah. And so taking away this whole area is actually removing some of that element of care, which is why I remembered it was a very strong point that you brought up in some ways before. So that is, and again, it's the man's role usually, traditionally, to protect and to make sure that care is, I think care is a very feminine quality. Not that masculine doesn't have it as well, obviously, but then I do believe that it's the masculine quality to protect that, to make sure that care can remain, because care is a soft thing, so that it generally takes the masculine to protect it. So that to me is the main moral injury at the moment with that.
Yes. And, I can't help but begin to share my own experiences of this last year and a half. And I did a little bit in our last interview, but I notice I experience this affront. It seeps into my world. It seeps into my life. You know, being more centered is more difficult these days, and it's and I see that as a moral injury, that this perpetration upon us, against us, it changes us, because we don't have a society that freely engages in the way that we did prior to these measures to take us away from one another. And so, you know, in fact, I just want to mention, you mentioned just as we were beginning our interview, that masks are now being brought back into the town where you live. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that in terms of how it affects, how you see that effect upon your own community.
Here, we're lucky. I think it doesn't have the same effect as in other places. As a community, we're quite strong in standing up for what are our rights. And so a very large majority of people are not wearing masks. However, again, because it's school holidays, it's what they did last time. They put it in this time so that people from out of town come in and they're all wearing masks. And it makes it appear somewhat skewed as to, you know, how that's going. And it's funny, you know, when you can still feel a general happiness. Generally speaking, this is a holiday destination. So the times that I have seen people wearing masks, they're still a bit happy-go-lucky. It's not a down, the energy isn't too down, which is good. You know, it's I don't particularly like seeing teenagers wearing masks, because I've seen quite a few getting around in masks. Yeah. And to them, the thing is, what I see is they're not questioning it because it's almost cool. It's like, you know, when you're a teenager, it's like if everybody had to wear a black armband because a sports person died or whatever, everyone's like, yeah, here's my armband. You know, it's kind of like you're fitting in. It's cool. It's the thing that you wear. And it's almost like something fashionable, like, oh, we're wearing our masks in there. So on the one hand, they're not really being oppressed. But on the other hand, it's kind of, I don't really like seeing it because it's obviously no good for them. But then neither is smoking or drinking or the other things that they're probably doing as well. So, you know, that's the only element that to me on a societal level is really not the way I would prefer. In general, though, the people here, we're doing a very good job of making sure that we retain our rights and our sovereignty and, you know, common sense. Literally, it can all be boiled down to common sense.
Yes. Yeah, that's very good. You know, I've been impressed and listening to your work on common law. And one of the things that I wanted to weave into this is some of that, because, you know, in my own life, I've certainly been conditioned, I've been taught how complicated law is, how complicated the political system is. And I did get very involved as a grassroots organizer and spearheaded a campaign to stop the drilling and fracking in our New Mexico County. And we succeeded. We kept Royal Dutch Shell out. It was a really long fight, and we based it upon our birthrights, because we understood that United States regulatory system of law was written and put together for corporations, and the corporations hired the politicians, they hired all their lobbyists to make the rules so that they could do their business. And so along with that, we realized that if we fought in that box with them, we were going to lose. So we fought based upon our birthrights. And I came upon something that was really fascinating to me. I didn't realize, so this has to do with law, and it has to do with our rights, and it has to do with moral injury and our birthrights. That I came upon something that said there's an artificial concept of the dignity of man, or the rights of man. and that was invented by the United Nations or the Court of Human Rights. And I was stunned by that because I hadn't realized that. I wondered if you had some comments on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're all born with rights. That's the basic deal, is that rights are our birthright and they can't be taken away. They're inalienable. But what we do is we're tricked by the way that we communicate and the way that we are indoctrinated. Like you said, you're made to believe that law is extremely complex, and so is politics, and so is health, and so is, oh, well, I can't do it, so the hospital and the doctor and the government can do it, or I can't do it, so the lawyers and the federal minister can do it. It's that's what we're indoctrinated into thinking. However, it's not true. So the reason that it may come as some surprise that this is our birthright, and well, it's just because we're never told. I mean, if we're never taught that, then why would we be expected to think otherwise? So rights are our birthright as far as just coming into the earth. So what happens is, because there's two mirror image worlds, there's the public and the private, or as I'm now starting to describe it, the jungle and the city. Well, they're mirror images of one another. So the jungle has its natural law. You know where you stand in the jungle. The city is completely man-made. So in the man-made world, or the world of entities, it's like that. We're conditioned into that. So then we're taught about benefits and privileges, like we're allowed to go here and drive there and get a license for that and get a bank account for this. But that's all just stuff that's been provided for us by the state as benefits and privileges. But benefits and privileges are far inferior to rights. The only reason that we seem to have no rights is because we inadvertently give them away, by the way that we speak, by the way that we hold ourselves, and by not knowing who we are in the first place. However, if we can correct the way we communicate and we remember who we are, all of a sudden now we're dealing with our rights. And we can waive benefits and privileges because we don't need those, because rights are superior. So really, it is just the indoctrination or the lack of education or the lack of remembering of who we are that makes it confusing to people, or even a bit of a surprise to learn that, hey, we have birthrights, but I never knew about them.
Well, yes. And so, it was an interesting thing. I've worked, as I said, as a grassroots organizer based upon our birthrights, but it's taken, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years to understand what birthrights mean, and that they're not some airy-fairy thing. And in fact, they're not even words to toss around. They actually mean something. And it's up to us to hold on to them and make them and give them their value, because it's like we weren't told about them, and yet they exist. And so as long as we follow that urban structure of man-made things, then we don't have those natural laws that really reflect who we are. So Tom, how do we, to prevent continued moral injury against us, against our men, how do we assert our birthrights? Because if we're told that, there's a dignity of man or the rights of man, but really those are false and empty, what do we do with this couplet, birthrights?
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, because the morality in remembering who we are is exactly the same as our rights in law. So natural law is based purely on morality. The injury to morality is when law is replaced with statutory color of law. It's not law, it's color of law. And likewise, while man has rights and birthrights and what have you, persons do not. And persons are what people actually inadvertently agree to being when they're not up to speed on the communication, the language that they're speaking, or just agreeing to, even if they're not speaking. So person is color of man, essentially. Well, actually, to be more precise, human. A human is color of man. Human in color, man meaning man. color of man. A human is not a man. A human actually is a monster, as according to Black's Law Dictionary. So even just that, even just agreeing to being human or a person or a driver or a citizen or a resident or anything statutory removes us by the words that we speak from being a man. Man also meaning woman in the same context, you know. So anything statutory or human, meaning color of man, therefore color of law, statute, not law, moves us away from morality itself. Morality is held by two laws and two laws only: love thy neighbor and love thy creator. You can essentially, that's your code for everything. That means cause no harm, cause no loss, essentially. Have respect, have morals. That's kind of it. It's all bunched up into love thy neighbor, love thy creator. In Australia, we have more than 7 million statutes, which is color of law. In the United States, more than 23 million.
Wow.
So I don't know anybody that wants to go ahead and learn 23 million statutes and delve into color of law. That's why it seems complex, but it's not, because it's love thy neighbor, love thy creator. It couldn't be more simple. So the injury then comes by way of man and woman inadvertently agreeing to being something that they're not, and therefore coming under all of those 23 million plus statutes, which essentially are devoid of morals from the majority of cases. Some still carry morality because they do pertain to harm and loss. The majority are statutory penalties for, oh, don't walk over there with your left foot, Kathleen. Or you use your right hand to touch that doorknob, that's a fine. You know, you're going to jail. There's no morality involved in that. And in fact, there is an injury to morality by attempting to impose that on good men and women. So why has it happened and how do we get it back? The way we get it back is, again, to remember who we are and to stop giving that power away to people who do not have it in the first place. People, corporate bodies, whatever, entities, doesn't matter. Stop giving it away. The way we maintain it is by learning how to speak in order to remember who we are. It's essentially that. Remember our ancestors, feel that in us, remember where we came from. And then when we can come into a solidified, not idea, a knowing of who we are, then the words we speak carry a greater resonance. And then when we learn about the language that we've been indoctrinated into, which is essentially English is the last language created by the legal profession. It's about 1,000 years old, according to various forms of history. Whether that's true or not, it's still one of the newest languages on earth and was the last language created by the legal profession, which means it is heavily indoctrinated with spells, spelling, word magic, spells, all that kind of stuff. So then we speak away our rights a lot of the time. Even if we know who we are, but we say, yeah, I'm Tom Barnett, agree to being a name, or yeah, I'm a person, yeah, I'm a driver, or sign this as a ratepayer or a citizen. Well then, hey, you're no longer a man because you just agreed, or a woman, to giving that away, subverting yourself to a creature of statute, a color of man or woman, not a man or a woman. So that might sound complex to people if they're new to it, but it's really not. It's probably 3 to 6 months of learning, and that's not even doing it full time. It's only a few key principles. And once those are become an inner standing, then we're really good. And I mean, I've got plenty of videos on it, and a lot of other people have as well, on simple basics of communication, like not answering questions. Only answering with impartial statements like that may or may not be true. We can get to that. Something along the lines where it's not a hard yes or a hard no. And generally speaking, we only ask questions in return. So all that comes from the Bible as well, funnily enough.
That is interesting. And how so from the Bible?
And what, sorry, how so?
And how does it come from the Bible?
Yeah, so the Old Testament is essentially a book on commerce. Religion and the Bible are two very different things. Religion takes the Bible to mean what the religion wants you to believe. The Bible itself is simply, as I said, the Old Testament is essentially a book on commerce. Commerce regulating trade. Trade mean buy and sell, which is what we do all the time, all day, every day. So it's essentially how to navigate the world of commerce and the rules of commerce. So generally speaking, in commerce, there's only two roles, like there are only two genders, not 100 and however many genders there apparently are these days. So there's only two roles, creditor and debtor. And you can be either or. You can switch between the two, but you can't be both at once. You can't be, I identify as this and that. You're only one or the other. And a creditor asks questions and directs the flow of an interaction. And a debtor answers questions and is directed in the flow of an interaction. So you can imagine, if you think about some of the interactions that you have each day, you might flip between being one or the other. The key in commerce is to only assume the debtor role. Sorry, the creditor role. Don't assume the debtor role. Only assume the creditor role. And you do that by the way that you speak and carry yourself. And at any stage, if you do not wish to participate, because commerce is optional, nobody can force you to buy their wares or to take their service. You know, us as health practitioners, we can't force anybody to do a session with us. That's optional. Hey, I can do a session on Wednesday and it'll cost you X amount of dollars. You have the right to say, well, I don't want to do that, or yes, I will do that, or I'd like to negotiate a different day, or I can't afford that. Can you do it at a cheaper rate, or can you do me a package? That's how commerce works. There is no part of man-made or natural law that says you must take that, you have no option. And that's the world of commerce. Everything is an offer. So if at any stage we're not happy with the offer, we just don't participate. But we have to voice. Because if we don't say we don't consent or negotiate or ask a question back or whatever, if we remain silent, it's dishonorable in commerce, and we essentially agree. So consenting is essentially a conscious decision to agree, whereas assent means an unconscious decision to agree. And that's what happens if we remain silent, which means if the government or some other corporation makes an offer, hey, you've got to wear masks, or you've got to take a jab, or you've got to do anything, and we remain silent. We just go, oh, I hate the government, and they can't do this, but we remain silent, and they offer us 3 times, well, we essentially agree through our silence. That's called assent, an unconscious decision to agree. So that's really the only rule, and it does come from natural law, because if we remain silent, we're not really speaking into the world who we are. Therefore, if we don't know who we are, how does the world know? It's always a reflection, the inner and the outer. So not remaining silent on issues that are pertinent to us and on moral issues essentially is an immorality that we create because we remain silent on issues that really matter to us. And so we can't complain if the world goes a certain way if we never voiced, because that's what we agreed to. By us not, knowing who we are and therefore letting the world know who we are, well, then we don't matter. We have no say. Doesn't mean we have no value, but it means that we can't complain about what happens in the world because we just, well, you didn't speak up. How are we supposed to know you didn't want it? We offered and you didn't say anything, so we gave it to you. It's pretty much how it works. And that's natural. The reason it's natural, you might think, oh, but that's unfair. I didn't agree to it. Yeah, you're right. But because you didn't not agree, then your ability to stand on your own 2 feet is taken away. If you don't think for yourself, someone else will think for you. If you don't speak for yourself, someone else will speak for you. That's a natural law. That's not man-made at all. That's actually natural. And it teaches us that we must form core values and morality, because if we don't, it's not there. And that's like a maxim of law. If it's not included, it's excluded. Or vice versa, it actually works as well. If it's not excluded, then it's included. So therefore, if we don't state who we are, natural law states, well, until you're sure, we'll do it for you. The world will do it for you. Nature will do it for you. And it's a really good lesson because so many of us, we want to avoid conflict, or we want to avoid anything that is somewhat difficult. So therefore, we essentially are not remembering who we are in the first place. And so, it's just, there's many more words to speak on that, but essentially that's the bottom line. Nature gives us the opportunity to state for ourselves and for nature and the world who we are, and then that is heard, that's recognized.
Very, very well described. So Tom, how is it that this deception came about and why? Why would there be a system to take us away from natural law, from our birthrights? What is that about? If you could address that.
So I can't give a definitive answer. I can give you my understanding of it, but it's definitely not the answer. My understanding is that the world goes through various ages. When I say that the world, I mean the realm that we're in, the plane that we're in, goes through ages. Like there's a, summer, autumn, winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter, spring. And then there's night and day, night and day. And they're like cycles. And that's on a scale that we can comprehend because we feel it. But there are also ages through golden, bronze, silver, whatever else, and these go for eons. So we are currently in a particular age. And what that means to me is that various entities that are part of this plane take control, and they may take human form, and there's a certain amount of power struggle being had, and these entities feed not on standard food the way we do. Hey, maybe they still eat the same food, not really sure, but I know that they feed more on energy and frequency. And the energy and frequency is actually ours. And so it's almost like you just need to think of it as different species altogether. There's us who have compassion and morals and love and everything else. And then there's the other types that assume the form of a man or a woman form, but are just not the same genetic beings as we are.
Would you think of them as psychopathic, psychopaths?
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, so psychopathic, sociopathic, whatever. Just devoid. The way I define that is that it's devoid of empathy and love, and also creativity. So it's us that have those virtues, not them. So realistically, we're far more powerful. So the way to curtail or to control something that is more powerful than you is to trick it into thinking that it's something else. So rather than thinking that we are men and women and have rights, we're tricked into thinking that we're persons and citizens and all these sorts of things. And by doing so, we never sit in our power. And what the media does, which is their control mechanism, and money, that's the other control mechanism, is that it essentially dictates the flow of the currency or the current in the sea. Hence maritime law, hence currency, money, whatever. That's what is the flow, which then moves our energy. Most of us aren't doing what we would do without there being money in the world, where energy is constantly being frittered away. And likewise, if the mind and the body mind are constantly in a suppressed state with heavier emotions such as fear, guilt, shame, regret, anger, apathy, any of that, well, then that is their food, as opposed to the higher frequencies of creativity, love, compassion, empathy, which is not their food. It's like their kryptonite. So what they do is essentially by way of tricking us into thinking we're something we're not, and by manipulating our mind and our body mind, well, then we give them the food that they need to maintain their power, which they don't innately have. We innately have power, and we give it away by our actions, what we think, the words we speak, the way we eat, the way we perceive the world around us, the way we perceive our brothers and sisters and perceive ourselves. But if that's all unified, we're inherently unbelievably powerful, and more powerful than they can bear or contain. So we need to be tricked into things. And so why? Well, why is so that they can maintain control. It's simply like an ego entity that just only wants more and more and more and more. Consume, power. Because there's no empathy or love in there to actually balance that out. We're supposed to balance that out. And to a degree, we do a good job, but I don't think enough of us do that. Too many of us are in what others would call, or the movie would call, the Matrix world, which is not being aware of these aspects of ourselves, and therefore not tapping enough collectively as a humanity into that power. Therefore, they can still run amok. If enough people woke up, so to speak, which is what most people's contention is these days, why isn't everyone waking up? If that happened, then that power would be unified collectively, and they would not be ruling this realm anymore. And so it's always just about a power struggle, and it's just going on an eon long cycle that, again, most people are also unaware of. So yeah, I mean, that's a big picture. That's a lot to take in for people, but to give some perspective to it, it kind of doesn't matter, because all we need to do as individuals is go inwards and unify ourselves. It doesn't matter about, that's almost insurmountable. If you think about what's been put in over many, many, many thousands of years, this system, the money, then the media, then the educational system, the medicine, all that, it's just, you can't even begin to dismantle that or comprehend it even. And we're not supposed to. That, even if you try to do that, it's taking us out of ourselves. We can't handle that. We need to be embodied and in our body to have any kind of positive effect. So it's not about that. It's even about being able to pick up a guitar and spend some time just in your own self, just playing, because that does more for the world than thinking, oh, it's so horrible there's kids in caves, it's so horrible that there's Fauci, there's so horrible that there's Bill Gates, and there's entities and not even human, oh my God, it's just, there's two. That does not help. And you think about what that does to you. Yeah. It takes you out of your body and out of your power. It brings you into a lower frequency, and you're feeding them. So we need to just come back to our creativity, our love, and our empathy, and doing very simple things. Being around a fire, being around brothers and sisters, creating with art and music and poetry and videos or whatever, stuff that's positive. That does more for the world than trying to figure things out or trying to change it, which we can't do anyway. But paradoxically, we do change it when we become harmonious with ourselves and concentrate on nature and our nature. And then that gives a greater effect into the world.
Right. Beautiful. And it's about life. It's about living life. And what's interesting in the last year and a half, we've, as a world, we've been lassoed by this madness. And the idea is to get us to focus much more closely on everything that is happening and to move us away from living our lives. So I loved what you said about going inside and connecting to ourself and our empowerment and the creative conscious mind that we continue to nourish, because that unconsciousness of that happens to our mind through the early programming keeps us very much enslaved. So by being in nature and by being creative people and by living our life, we throw away all those shackles and we begin to live the experience of what it is like to live our birthrights through our creativity, through our connection with other people. And that in and of itself exposes the big fraud of what is happening in the outer narrative, right? But isn't that our purpose in this physical body? In my words, it's our soul journey, and we must develop that inner world in order to fulfill our reason of being in this physical body. And so even no matter what the outer narrative is, it could be, it could be that there are 16 amusement parks out there, or 23 Ferris wheels of whatever options there are to go on. And it doesn't matter. That's an outer narrative. It's the inner world and the development of that and the connection to ourself that is the whole purpose of being born and walking through this thing called life.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I totally agree.
So it's kind of funny because it's just another form of madness to distract us from our own empowerment. And when we don't succumb, like in your town, they're trying to bring in the masks, but if nobody agrees, they have no power. So when people understand their birthrights, and when people start and they don't consent through a contract with whatever agency is trying to present that to them, and if they go about living their life, they, you know, the theys have no power. Their power only comes from their attempts at moral injury, their attempts at control. It's a bit of a mirage of sorts.
Yeah, it is. It is an illusion, absolutely. And it's interesting though, because you're right. If enough people, it is just an offer, and if enough people just say no thanks, then they don't have power. People call on the powers that be, but we give them that power. If we just say no, and no is one of the most misused words in society in general. How many of us find it hard to say no? You know, no, like no, that goes against my core values. You know, we let people abuse us many times over, almost every day, and we don't say no to having our time or our energy taken by our fellow brothers and sisters. Not even the system, just, you know, not being able to say no to things. So it's very important. And what's more important is to realize that it's more difficult for us that in this stage, in this age that we're in, for whatever reason, we've got more of a job to do, because there aren't enough people saying no. So even in our town, which as a percentage, probably greater than other places in the world, there's still a lot of people who will just drink the Kool-Aid and wear a mask and say that you're being irresponsible for not wearing one or whatever. So it takes a lot more for those of us who are currently a minority to still remain grounded in that situation, because it's only that grounding that will, therefore, we can then work with the earth, and the earth will do the job of actually, you know, bringing forth a new understanding for those that currently don't have it. It's not necessarily us, and we have to run around waking people up. Because, and that's funny, because if enough people just stood up, it would be very, very easy, but it's not. There's not enough people. So that means that we have to be even stronger in ourselves, which I believe is actually a favor, because it's one thing to say, no, we don't want that because everybody's doing it. Everybody says no. No, that's actually easy. But to be in a minority and say no, but to hold that as a minority takes a lot more strength. You need to be way more sure about who you are to do that as a minority, to then affect the greater, than it is if everyone's doing it. Because it's just like, oh yes, everyone's doing it. No, thanks. But you don't have to dig deep for that.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yes, that's a very important point about being able to clearly, with empowerment, say no, and to stick to it and understand what it means. And it's an example to others. It's probably one of the greater examples, because it's about respect of oneself, right? It's about refusing moral injury. It's really about love, and we're not taught that. So it's about turning everything inside out and taking a look at what it means to refuse that narrative that we've been so keenly taught, and as good abiding men and women, we have done to keep the peace and to be upstanding men and women, but it's been to our detriment. And so now we're learning how to be good men and women, and good in the sense of respectful to oneself and one another, and examples, so that others can experience there's a pleasure, is there not? I mean, I'm certain that you know it. I sense it with you in walking with that kind of empowerment. You understand how that is, correct?
Yeah, it's It's more, if I had to pick it though, it's more a connection to the earth and a connection to a higher purpose that I feel more than an empowerment based on knowing rights. I think there's an element of it, but it's more something greater than that for me. That gives me that sense of joy or sense of content and calmness. It comes from that element.
Very nice. Can you summarize some of the takeaways from this conversation that you'd like people to think about more as a result of what we've talked about, or
Sure.
new?
Yeah. Okay. So I would first of all say that if you would like some inspiration or guideposts as to be inspired about how to act and who you are, don't look at anything in the last 100 years. Go before that. If you want to find out what a man is and a woman is, go back in time before it was corrupted and perverted into what is told to us that we're supposed to be today, because we're taken out of our nature.
Good point.
The second part of that is to connect to your nature, which is connecting to nature. So if you observe nature enough and you spend enough time in it, well, it's a lot easier then to connect to your femininity and your masculinity, whether you're a man or a woman, because we each have both. So we can connect to those elements the more we observe and spend time in connecting to nature. Then we're connecting to our nature. Being grounded is by far the most important aspect of the way we carry ourselves through life. When we work with nature because of our connection to the earth, and we work with our spirit, which is a connection to something higher than us, then it's much easier to carry forth the morality that is lost in modern society. Because when those connections are severed, then with it goes the morality, with it goes the compass by which, I mean, who needs laws to tell you not to, wreck somebody's lawn or punch them in the face? You don't need laws, or to steal their money or their kids or their wife or something. You don't need laws to tell you that. You know that. That's inherent. And so love thy neighbor, love thy creator is simply there to reflect that. It's a reflection of natural law. Then we just need to remember that and not be tricked or coerced into agreeing to being something that we're not. We're men and women, and that's it. We're not color of man or woman. We're not a creature of statute. We are man and woman. So just remember that, and then avoid the trickery of becoming a name and becoming a creature of statute of some kind, a driver, a taxpayer, a resident, a citizen, a bank, a trustee, any of those things. So I think those are the takeaways for me. I think one of the elements people miss is that they come from fear and they try to grab straight onto axe codes and what's my rights? What's my rights? Teach me my rights. But I can't teach you your rights. You're supposed to just remember your rights, because I can't teach you who you are. Neither can Kathleen, and neither can anybody doing the summits. They can just help you to remember some of the aspects you may have forgotten. So that's the most important thing to me. Until you find that connection to your higher self and your groundedness connected to the earth, I don't believe that grasping at rights is going to be the answer that you're looking for, because it can't come from that fear place in the first place. It's one of those elements of food for the entities. So I get it though, and if that's the first place to start to tip the scales, then by all means go for it. Just know that it needs to come back to a grounding and a connectedness before it will carry across the infinite plane. The rights is an element, yes. And I wouldn't speak about it if it had no value, but I've just got to reiterate that as the world continues to change and we move through the ages, it's going to be more and more important that you're grounded. Otherwise, you'll be swept away in the currency. So that's the most important thing to me.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you one thing that you said, to connect to nature. I've heard that term, I've used it. What does connect with nature mean to you? And could you, let's say someone's listening to this and they're saying, well, what do you mean by that, Tom? I mean, Okay, I want to be grounded. I want to, I want to feel that inner connection and to nature and to, to higher power. But how do I do that, Tom? I know that's a big question, but what do we mean by connect to nature?
I'll answer it for myself, and maybe people can get some inspiration from my experience, because
Please.
I'm not saying that there is the way to do it. It's just the way I do it. First of all, is I immerse myself in nature. Number one, if I'm outside and I'm in nature, I have my feet on the earth. I don't wear shoes, for example. I get the sun on my body as much as possible, and I really feel it. Everybody knows that feeling. It feels great to get, for example, sun on your skin. It's like it's doing something. It's like it's kissing you or something. It's just, and same as the wind. If you can feel the wind, instead of just noticing, oh, it's windy today, but actually feel the wind like caress you in ways, then it's a different way of you are connecting them with nature. And then with the wind, for example, just off the top of my head, going with wind, you can feel it caress you. And then you might think, well, I can't see wind, but then maybe you'll start looking for wind. How can I see the wind? Well, I'm watching the way the birds move. They're actually following energy patterns. So now I'm starting to see it. Or I'm watching the way trees and leaves move. Something where you're connecting more deeply to the element itself.
Mm.
But really, it's the feeling. And then as you feel that, coming into your body so that you can feel it fully. And when you're in your body, you're embodied, and you're much more connected to yourself and therefore with nature itself. So it's really an immersion. To me, the connectedness is an immersion in nature and not just observing it. Like when people go to a wildlife park or on holiday and they're just like, oh, there's a bird, click. And then, oh, hey, I'm on the ocean, click. And it's just like, that's not immersing, that's observing. And that's not being connected to nature. Being connected is immersing in and feeling it and feeling what it feels like, and relating it to something. So for me, when I'm out, when I'm connecting, it feels like nature is like a mother, and it has me. I can give it anything that I'm carrying. I can give it up to the trees or the grass or the sky, and it'll just take it. Not just it'll take it, it'll willingly say, give me that. I can take that. Give it to me. You're not burdening me. It can take way more than that. Just give it to me. And then that feels like immersion and connection as well. Yeah, anything. Watching a fire, seeing it in yourself, feeling that part of you that is fire. Water, feeling the part of you that's water. All of that is connecting.
Very, very, very fine answer. I appreciate that, and that's great. Well, Tom, thank you again for a really fine conversation. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about moral injury and our birthrights? And
Sure. Yeah. Well, look, like any injury, we often get stronger from it. We learn a lot from it. Like a physical injury, it's generally ends up being a good thing. It can be painful while it happens, but then it ends up being something of value. So I don't malign the fact that our morals have been injured the way that they have, because it can then make us way more solidified in what morality really is and what it is for us. So everything is an offer and everything is there to learn from. So the offer I feel at the moment is, hey guys, we've been living a little too far outside of the bounds of morality for a while. Not everybody, but in general, the way we're conducting ourselves and serving. Again, it's not a religious thing, but the Bible says you can only serve one master. The master we're supposed to serve is the creator. Man was never supposed to create government. So while we're serving government, then the creator is essentially, we're never meant to make earthly kings. Again, that's not religious. That's just a principle that is passed down through many spiritual texts. And so coming back to serving our higher selves and the creator, as opposed to serving the health department, the police, the government, which is man-made, the city, as opposed to the jungle. Like in the jungle, you just serve natural law and your place in the jungle. In the city, that's all man-made stuff. We're not supposed to serve that. And we're not supposed to serve money, for example. So as we move away from serving man-made ethics, man-made rules, man-made, like men, then, I mean, men aren't man-made, but you know what I mean? Like man creates kings.
yes,
Creator created man, and man creates kings and like celebrities and all that kind of stuff. Stop serving that and start serving nature, what we're supposed to do, and then morality will return as a result.
Yes, very, very fine. You know, what strikes me so much too is that when we think with the proper words and we speak with the proper words, was it Don Miguel Ruiz said, your words must be impeccable as one of the 4 agreements. And this really comes to bear in what we're talking about, because words have magic spells. They are very powerful. And when we empower ourselves with the use of words, both in thought and verbally, our whole world changes. And I guess it's rather exciting to know that we have that much capacity to make our lives that rich and that full, and those of our family and our friends and community. So yeah, and Tom, you do teach this classes, right, on learning how to navigate through this falsity of terminology and this maritime law. Is that not correct? If people wanted to learn through
well, I'm doing like in-person workshops here in our area. I've started to do some Zoom ones as well. There's basically, if people go on my website, which is tombarnett.tv, and go onto the mailing list, which is in the contact mailing list section, that's where I'll advertise for when we're going to be running workshops on Zoom for people who are not in this area. They're kind of limited though, because I'm not really trying to do it for money. It's just there's a big part of it is role play. And yeah, I could fill them right up, but I don't think it really serves people, because I think 20 is the maximum we can have in a Zoom, because everybody's got to have a go at role playing, which means, you know, speaking with me as a role play, and everyone else can listen in to everyone else. And it's really beneficial that way. So it's just, I'd like to be able to help more people, but I just don't think you can do it and actually give value to people. But all the workshops that I'm doing, we're recording, and I'm going to make those available all together as a package very soon. So again, the mailing list is where I'll be letting people know when that's available. That and my Telegram, which is also tombarnett.tv.
Very good. Well, thank you, Tom. It's been a real pleasure once again.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Kathleen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.